Welcome to episode 8 of Game Savers Podcast, your next gen podcast for everything video game related. Today, we are going to be talking about the original Xbox, the one that was released all the way back in 2001. But first, let me introduce everyone. As always, I'm Wayne, and I love video games. I'm also joined by today my co-host.
Hey, I'm Tony. You know who I am, but I'm playing Luke today, and Wayne is Han Solo. So Wayne is leading the troops today.
And we've also got...
Oh, my name's Jack. I'm an illustrator and a bona fide meme lord.
And last but not least.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm a video game enthusiast, I could say. I've been writing for an Xbox magazine in Germany, been playing video games my entire life, and also make horrible noise in my bands Worn Out and Abysm.
Excellent.
Beautiful.
Okay, so before we jump in and start talking about the Xbox itself, I imagine everyone here owned the original Xbox. Is that right?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I have a confession. I didn't actually own one. My brother had one, and I would have went over to my brother's house and played Xbox then. That era, 6th generation console, I was still big into Nintendo, so GameCube was my jam. But you know, very familiar with the console, and I've done my homework and my research to make sure that we're all good for today's podcast.
Going over to a friend's house anyway. That was the way to do it, right? I mean, you are
absolutely. I mean, there's something I didn't even know about the original Xbox in terms of going over to your friend's house, but we'll cover that in a bit. Before we go into this, before the Xbox launched, we were living in a world of Sega, Nintendo, and PlayStation, and obviously PC gaming. What platforms were you guys gaming on before Xbox launched? We'll start with you, Tony.
I was still a PlayStation boy, not as big on Nintendo at the time, but I was also doing some competitive StarCraft, the original series, like the original StarCraft on PC, Broodor. Not that my PC could run it very well. There were probably a lot of other RTS strategy games at the time. I can't remember if it might have been too early for Age of Empires yet at that point. Age of Mythology, some others, but yeah, PC was my jam at the time.
Alex, what was your platform of choice?
I was completely a Nintendo kid. I had the Super Nintendo. I had the Game Boy. Loved those consoles to death. Had a small dipping my toe into PC gaming. That was right before I got the Xbox, but apart from that, I've always been like a Nintendo kid up to this point.
And Jack, what about yourself?
I was pretty much playing the 64 and the Game Boy. I think I was about 8 years old when the Xbox released, so I was playing Mario or Pokemon most of the time. So
Yeah. A lot of my gaming back then, I mean, at home it would have been PC gaming. Much of my console gaming, I've talked in the past about how my dad wasn't a fan of consoles and wasn't keen on having them in the house. So most of my console gaming would have been around at a friend's house. GoldenEye on the N64 was a big one, you know, and I'll talk about that again later because I think that ties into one of the big Xbox titles. But yeah. Then obviously Nintendo, Sega, big players. PlayStation just came in and exploded out of nowhere, and then we had a new contender on the block. Microsoft decided they were going to get involved and join in the console wars. But Microsoft then were known for not very sexy or exciting things. Spreadsheets, databases, Windows operating systems, you know, desktop computers, that sort of thing. Do you guys remember Microsoft sort of coming on the market and saying, "Yeah, we're gonna do a video game console"? Alex, what was your reaction to that?
Well, I was kind of surprised. I mean, PC gaming was a thing. I don't know if it was like in Ireland, but it was, of course, in Germany, playing Doom, playing Quake. So it kind of felt like fitting to me, but I was like, I don't know, they just stick to PC. I don't think this is going to go well, and I think this console will be probably done in a year or two. Here I am proving wrong. It's my favorite console now.
So the expectations were low. You didn't think this was gonna, yeah. Tony, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty young at the time, so when the OG Xbox came onto the scene, I can't remember exactly how, but I do remember the first couple times I saw Halo Combat Evolved showing up on the front page of Game Informers and, things like that. And was like, well, what the hell is this thing with the big green logo? And, you'd go to Blockbusters or Walmart, other retails here in the US, and you'd start seeing, entire shelves, just nothing but Xbox games. Like, well, what the hell is that? I want to see what that's about, because you're so used to playing those PlayStation games and Nintendo cartridges. And I remember that was kind of how I started getting interested in it. But first time playing it, maybe we can get into that in a bit. But yeah, through friends was what really ended up hooking me.
Yeah. So it was March of the year 2000 where Bill Gates announced it for the first time, but we didn't actually see anything until January 2001. They unveiled it at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, and they got The Rock to come in beside them.
Dwayne Johnson.
I don't remember the entire time.
I don't remember that from the time, but I mean, I think we've all went back and seen it. We've watched video compilations of, the 10 best console reveals and stuff like that. Such contrast, and it was necessary contrast because they had Bill Gates, and Bill Gates is as far from cool as you can get. This guy was not down with the kids. He came on with his trousers pulled up high and an unironed shirt sort of kind of tucked in, but not quite. And then The Rock comes out and just stands beside him and does what The Rock does. I think there's actually a lot can still be learned from that. Mark Cerny, for example, is a guy at PlayStation, very, very, very technically minded because that's his job. But they put him in front of gamers and try and sell video game consoles and video games to people off the back of this guy who gives these very, very sort of corporate talks. So I've always thought that, bring people like The Rock on. It needs to be done in such a way that, if you bring on celebrities that aren't interested in gaming whatsoever, it comes across as a bit shallow. But I thought using someone like The Rock, and especially how he's a character from the wrestling games that were coming out on Xbox and stuff. Great move. What did you think of that, Tony? The Rock promoting Xbox?
Yeah, gosh. Dwayne Johnson. I mean, early 2000s, late 90s, I don't think you could have found a bigger star to go out there and do that. Professional wrestling was, and I won't turn this into the WWE podcast or anything, but at the time, I mean, there was nobody bigger than The Rock. The people's elbow, who's a jabroni, who's not, this, that, and the other. Was just incredible. I mean, you look at today, like 19 years later, and you had Keanu Reeves here pretty recently showing off some stuff with Cyberpunk. That to me was, again, another perfect tap into a celebrity. And I think that was the start of really tapping into something great, was getting the people's elbow out there in front of everybody back in 2001.
What was it? Whenever Keanu came out on stage that time recently, someone shouted at him.
I think it all took off when he was on stage and somebody said, "You're brilliant, you're great." Or,
you're wonderful.
You're wonderful.
And then he shouted back, "No, you're wonderful." And it was just, it couldn't have been more Keanu,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fun fact about this, the guy that shouted this actually got promised a Cyberpunk 2077 Collector's Edition from CDPR.
Nice.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
That's
so
nice.
Next time I'm at if E3 ever comes back around, I'm going to be just shouting in the crowd all day. Give me something.
Here's the thing about this: you can really see on each press conference from that E3, people started shouting random stuff because they heard this, and then I can grab some free stuff here.
Yeah,
that's already happened.
Yeah.
Jack.
Oh, what?
Oh, go ahead. I was going to say, what did you think of The Rock? I know you've got some golden opinions there.
I loved The Rock when I was a kid. I used to practice the eyebrow that he did all the time. I could still kind of do it now, the eyebrow thing.
Whoa, he just did the people's eyebrow here. I got
the people's eyebrow, man. But I loved him. I loved his haircut. I just loved his attitude. He was getting into movies around that time too, and I was just so stoked. So I think to see him promoting the Xbox when I was a kid, that was the only thing I clearly remember about Xbox. And I was like, I got to get it because The Rock said I got to get it. And so I think being a kid during that time, especially a really young kid, I think it was really spectacular. So exciting.
Very briefly, while we're on it, is there any sort of that was a good one? Was there any bad ones? Was there any sort of car crash celebrity promotion things within the world of video games? I've got one. The Guitar Hero talk once, and they rolled out Slash, and you think that Slash is going to come on and just I was going to say one of the best guitar players in the world. He's probably not one of the best, but he's without doubt one of the most famous, one of the most recognizable, and with some of the most recognizable songs in the history of rock music. And he came out playing Sweet Child of Mine, and he completely made a mess of it. It was awful. Now, I don't know. It was whenever Guns N' Roses weren't playing in any shape or form, and they all hated each other. So it's possible he never played that song. It's possible maybe it had a few too many drinks backstage. I don't know. But I just remember Slash coming on stage and just going, oh, like, how can Slash screw up Sweet Child of Mine? I was such a car crash.
I can't remember any specific celebrities. I know there's been too many for me to count, though. Where they come out and I'm like, one, who is this? Or two, like, what are you doing? Get off the stage. Like, I want to see the game. But I can't remember anybody specific on my end.
Yeah. Touching a wee bit more on the marketing for the Xbox. Does anyone remember the Life is Short, Play More advert that got banned?
Yeah, I saw it like maybe. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jack. Jack, you can tell us about it then.
Well, I just remember, like, I remember seeing like those commercials and those ads, and then I remember they just kind of stopped one day. I didn't know a whole lot about the banning thing. I just thought that they just switched marketing strategies, and then when you guys post like, oh, it got banned, I was like that's why they didn't do it anymore. But like,
so what is this for the people at home? Because I'm not sure I understand what this.
There was an advert for Xbox, and it's basically a woman in hospital giving birth to a kid, and the kid shoots out at like 100 miles per hour, flies through the sky, and as he's flying through the sky, he ages from a newborn right through teenager, midlife, to an old person, and then lands in a grave, and then it just comes.
Oh no!
Life's short, play more. Now, by today's standards, I mean, is that bannable? Is that really, too much for people to handle? I don't think so at all. It's
ridiculous.
It seems weird looking back 20 years and going, that's something that was worth banning. I mean, that was around about the time. I'm always looking at comparisons between video games and music and stuff. That must have been close to when The Prodigy released the music video for Smack My Bitch Up.
Oh,
and you can watch something like that and go, oh yeah, I can see why people might
edgy
want to ban that. But that Xbox advert, that seems really tame, relatively speaking.
Yeah, the bar has changed.
Yeah,
definitely.
So the console came out. It was $300 in America, despite the fact that estimates said that to build one of these consoles was around about $400, maybe $450. So they were selling the thing at cost to get these boxes into people's homes. Obviously, the money then came from selling the games afterwards, which is, I mean, it's a strategy that's used for a lot of consoles. I think to this day, it may still be the case. But Alex, you have an interesting story. That wasn't necessarily the case everywhere.
That's the thing. I remember very clearly that the console was sold for $2.99 in the US, and everyone in Germany was like, "This is ridiculous. We're paying $4.99 in Germany," and they just really sold it for $4.99.
Oh my gosh, we just had the new consoles here for $4.99, like 20 years later, and you were paying this price 20 years ago for the OG Xbox.
Definitely. So they just put the OG Xbox for $4.99 in stores. And no one would buy them because, it's too expensive and everything. And then they lowered the price maybe a month or maybe 2 months later to $2.99. And everyone who bought the Xbox during the first period, during the first month, were granted 2 free games and 1 controller. So, this tanked completely in Germany.
Well, I'd be interested to know if that was a Mad Catz controller or first party. Like how apologetic were they?
This was actually an original Xbox controller, so the Duke.
Oh, the Duke.
Yeah, the Duke.
Yeah. Okay, well, since you've brought it up, let's talk about the controllers. There was the Duke, and then there was the S controller. I only found out recently the S was a redesign specifically for the Japanese market. They had put out the Juke controller, a big chunky round thing that I mean, it's like holding big fat pancake or something. It was it was different, and I say it was different and unique. It wasn't actually too far from the Dreamcast controller. But by today's standards and compared to other things like what we've got used to, the early PlayStation controllers, the GameCube controller, it was quite different and fairly unique. But they thought that would never go down well in Japan.
Mhm.
So they redesigned a smaller, more sort of ergonomic controller for Japan, and everyone preferred it, and it became the de facto standard. But which controller did you guys prefer, Alex?
Well, I prefer the S controller. Don't get me wrong; I don't have a problem with the Duke. It was actually fine for my hands. Didn't feel too big, but just the buttons. They had like a specific shape that every time when I pressed the button, it felt like they've been digging into my fingertips ever so slightly. So yeah, that's why I prefer the S controller actually.
I get that with racing games. Like I don't know what it is, but I just feel I need to hold the accelerator so tight that when I let go, there's that little round indent in my finger. Like Mario Kart specifically, I get that a lot. Yeah. Tony, Juke or the S?
Duke for me, 100% was the way to go at the time.
Yeah.
Even as a child, I mean, I had abnormally large Sasquatch hands, and you've heard me talk about that on the pod before. And this controller to me felt right at home. I remember at the time, I don't think we had adopted the PS1, PS2, thumbsticks just yet. So I honestly can't remember if this was my first time getting to go at real thumbsticks yet, but just felt right at home. And I think, to take the leap the way they did to have those offset sticks was pretty incredible at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You obviously had Nintendo with their, that whatever that stick was called, the C stick, I think, the yellow one.
Yeah.
And, having that right there in the middle of the controller was obviously a little bit different. Those were offset too. But to have a controller of this style and have them that far offset with the D-pad where it's at, I'm staring at it right now and I can remember it like it was yesterday. But I was always player one with that thing. Always thought it was great. And yeah, Duke for me, 100%. My brother was the poor soul that always got stuck with the Mad Cats in the house. So,
Jack, the Duke or the S?
I was for the Duke, but you guys aren't going to like the reason I was for the Duke. Me and my brother, when we played on the Xbox, we kind of got really angry when we played video games. We went through several controllers when we were young, especially like the PlayStation 2 and the GameCube controller. But the Duke, man, that thing stood forever. Like, we would Randy Johnson fastball pitch the controller, and it would still just pick it up and play like normal. I think from more like user technical standpoint, though, like I had small hands. I still have small hands, but like I was able to play it real well. I had just like a natural good feel for it. And I got to know that controller so much just playing like Halo, Crimson Skies. I would just be like, I'd move my hands around because my hands were so small, but like I love that controller so much.
What a beautiful thing. What about you, Wayne? Which did you prefer?
Honestly, because I was going to someone else's house, whatever they put in my hands, that was me. I was happy.
That's all you can
So
take.
you got the Mad Cats.
Yeah, you got the Mad Cats. Unless your host was like truly generous, and you've been like just beating the absolute crap out of your friend, and you're finally like, you know what? All right, I'll switch controllers and I'll take the Mad Cats this round and just see if it makes a difference.
It shouldn't have been Mad Cats. It should have been Mad Curse, because it was a curse anytime you were handed that controller. That was.
Do you guys actually know the story behind the Duke? Why the Duke looks the way it looks?
I don't know.
There's actually a quite interesting story. Microsoft was working together with Sega on the Dreamcast. And if you compare the two consoles, there are a lot of similarities there, especially when it comes to the controller. So when Sega went out of the hardware business and Microsoft said, okay, we're going to make a console, they actually started to copy the Dreamcast controller with one stick. And it should have one stick just from the get-go. And then they purchased Bungie. Microsoft purchased Bungie. And Bungie was like, yeah, we need a second stick. Microsoft at first was, no, there's not going to be a second stick. And Bungie really convinced them, look, we're going to build a game. We're going to build a game with the support for a second stick. And then we're going to show it to you. And after they showed them Halo with this implemented, they were like, okay, maybe you need to rethink the controller. And there comes the second stick from.
Wow.
Excellent.
That is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I think that grip of having one hand on one side of the controller and one hand on the other with a stick under each thumb, to me, that was mind-blowing, based on the fact that some of it came off the N64. Because if you remember that controller, What a mess!
Reaver, Horn,
What a
Demon.
mess! I would hold the center. I mean, the game I mostly played would have been Mario Kart 64 or GoldenEye. So you've one hand holding this center stick, with the other hand off to the side, and it was the most awkward. It's not even easy to talk about. It's just everything about that controller was just awkward. So I think those guys were, whenever they got to design a controller based off what people were coming from, it was easy. It was easy. One thing I didn't realize until recently, and I think this is a fantastic idea, and I'm surprised it didn't become kind of de facto standard. There was 8 megabytes worth of storage in the Xbox controller.
Really?
Yep, 8 megabytes of storage.
I remember that.
You could have save games on that. So if you had more than one Xbox, or if you were going around to a friend's house, you could save your game on the controller itself. This is similar to the Dreamcast. It had the little yoke in it.
You mean the memory cards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do remember inserting those memory cards into the back of the controller, and that was a pretty wild concept at the time, because PlayStation at the time, you could only shove it right in the console,
What's even better than that is that not just the save game, you can have your profile on it. And I think this would be great if you could go around to your house, your friend's house, just with your console controller and press the Xbox and sync up to theirs, and your profile's just there instead of having to log on a friend's computer and type in your password and all that shenanigans. I think that would have been great. I think that would have been a great standard to have your controller tied to your profile.
But that's the thing. It's not tied to the controller. It's tied to the memory card that you put on top of the controller. Sure. And that's an indicator. They just stole this design straight from Sega.
Yeah.
Like this whole design.
Yeah.
Did Sega have that? Oh, sorry.
The Dreamcast
did Sega
had
have that? Were they?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Dreamcast went one further. They actually, because their memory cards had a little screen on it, there was actually games you could play on the memory card that went into the controller. Now they were rubbish, but
Rubbish.
and I think there was I don't remember this exactly. There was a game called Choo Choo Rocket, and I think there was something that tied in with the memory card. The little display thing showed certain things based on what you were playing in the game. It's kind of it's a very Nintendo thing almost. Nintendo are mad into all these things. Stick a little display onto your controller. I'm surprised it's not something that's kind of picked off. I don't know if you are familiar with MacBook computers, but they have started putting a little a little OLED screen.
Yep.
Which is like a long strip above the keyboard, and it's replaced the function keys. I think something like that could work really cool in a controller. Obviously, it's going to bump the price of it up considerably. You're probably looking at maybe $80 or $90 rather than $60 for a controller. But I think it's an interesting idea, and it wouldn't surprise me if it was something that kind of ended up going back in there. Let's talk about the console itself. We'll start with the specs. It was a 733 megahertz, not gigahertz, but back in the days of megahertz. And it was actually an off-the-shelf CPU. So these days we get these customized CPUs that go into our consoles. This was just an off-the-shelf Pentium 3. 64 megabytes of RAM, and a 233 megahertz GPU, and that compares to the PS2 all of it was around about half of that, so 300 megahertz in the PS2, 32 megabyte and a 150 megahertz GPU. First of all, did we care back then? Because, well, I'll ask you guys first. Did you care about the specs of a console, Alex?
Yeah, I did care about it. Because I had a direct comparison. I had a good friend. He had a PlayStation 2, and I had the Xbox. And we both bought, I think it was Max Payne 2 back in the day. And he bought it for PlayStation, I bought it for the Xbox. And just seeing the two games side by side, it's like a night and day difference. We always said seriously feels like the Xbox is just one generation ahead of the PlayStation. So yeah, it was a big deal actually.
Tony, what were your thoughts in terms of specs?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, looking back at it, wow. I can't even compare that to what we have today, just being more fluent with PC gaming. And, I mean, those specs wouldn't even hold up anything today, right? I mean, you just don't see that level anywhere. So it's hard to compare. But At the time, I was probably a lot more interested in the console design, I think.
Yeah.
You know, for me as a kid, having that, it was this huge chunky box that, you know, seemed to be indestructible for the most part. I mean, I think our dogs ate it. I think, you know, we probably like dropped it down a few flights of stairs, moving it around our rooms in the house. Indestructible, the console itself. But yeah, as far as the specs, I couldn't speak to that.
Yeah. And Jack?
I don't think I could really speak much on the specs as well, but I think recalling back, one thing I remember fondly as a kid was like, I would see, because I had like the Xbox, the PlayStation 2, and the GameCube, and I didn't understand much about specs, but I knew any game that we played on the Xbox was like 10 times more, like just better to look at. Like you can tell like, oh wow, this just looked great. And then you play like the same, like the Max Payne example, like you'd see the same game on PlayStation. It's like, oh, this looks like muddied polygons, but like on the Xbox is like, holy shit, this is awesome. So yeah, no, the difference was definitely there for sure.
So I think for a lot of people at the time, it was as much about they were happy that it was a better and faster console than the competitors, but not necessarily concerned about, you know, how many megahertz is this thing pushing out, that sort of thing. For me at the time, going back then, I mean, if you think of the likes of the N64, that generation, I didn't care what chips or what speed of stuff was in there. To me, that was the appeal. That was what was so good about consoles. You took it out of a box, you plug 2 cables in, bang, away you go. Who cares what's happening under the hood, you know? I think it might have been Microsoft that started to change those attitudes with the Xbox. You know, the fact that they were coming out and telling us, you know, that there's a Pentium 3 in here, and Pentium was a household name. We all kind of knew what a Pentium was because we'd been bombarded with those £1,000, $1,000 PCs that you spent, you know, what was it, £10 a month, and you paid forever to get them back then. I don't know if anyone remembers those, like the Gateway PCs. They came with everything. I'm going off topic. Don't worry about it.
I remember the Gateway Z machines, Dells. Yeah, those were
awful,
the ones.
awful computers. Yeah, and then the actual design of it, I think looking back, it's a bit of an awkward looking design.
Definitely.
For its time, you know, compared to its contemporaries, it was huge. I mean, if you put that Xbox beside a GameCube, it just, you know, the GameCube's dwarfed by it. But what did you guys think? What did you think of the design and how it looked and the style of it? I'll start with you, Tony.
Yeah, again, touching on that, I mean, it was huge, indestructible. It seemed like I think one thing standing out I didn't mention on this, those ridges on the sides I thought were really cool and appealing. I think PlayStation 2 had something like that later on the sides, but they were horizontal where Xboxes were vertical. Not a huge difference, but still aesthetics, right? Other things too, gosh, as far as the design goes, I mean, I don't think we've seen as a defined power and open disc tray button since then, right? You think of the 360 or the Xbox One or even the new ones. Like, I mean, you know where it is and you know how to find it, but back then, like, you knew immediately, like, oh, that's the power button. That's how I open the disc tray. There were 2 of them right there on the front. And they were huge and you could not miss them. Whereas today, it's almost like a shameful button, like, well, I don't want to see buttons on my console design, dude. It's got to look flashy. You better hide that shit. I don't want to see it. You know what I mean? So I think that was one of the last, you know, in-home consoles where you really saw that clear, defined, hey, here's the 2 main functional buttons you need to have on the console. And, you know, today they're still there, but they're hidden. They're almost shameful. So props to Xbox for making those front and center.
Alex, what did you think of it?
I thought it looked like a piece of hi-fi equipment. Like I had this a stereo system back in the day, like with an amplifier and CD player, and had like a shelf for it, and I just put it on top of there, and that's it. So it just looked like a CD player.
And there was a bunch. I mean, they put out a lot of special edition Xboxes. The one that springs to my mind is the Halo one with kind of took on the design of Master Chief's armor and tried to make a console out of it. Did anyone own one of the special editions?
Just the OG.
Yeah,
I did know friends that had like the green, I think there was even a see-through console if I recall correctly. Yeah,
the crystal one and the green one, like see-through, I think.
Yeah, yep. Yeah. I faintly remember that.
I have always hated those things. I remember like controllers. You used to get controllers with the transparent plastic, so you can see like the PCB boards and the chips and all underneath. I never understood that. Like
that's the thing these days too. Like, look at PC gaming. I'm looking at mine next to me, and the entire side of it's transparent, right? I mean,
yeah.
Was that revolutionary?
I guess to a degree, it would have been, yeah.
Depends on taste.
Even the Switch Pro controller has it up until today, so it's a little bit translucent.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true. Jack, what did you think about the design?
I thought it was pretty cool. I think it was like a mixture of both like simple, but like more of like that postmodern, like industrial look for a console. Like you just had this big blocky thing and these really large buttons, but it looked very sleek. It looked very like innovative in a sense. And I also have a bias for the color green. So like that big green circle on like the day one Xbox, I was like, yo, that looks so badass. And like, I think just the overall aesthetics of the Xbox was awesome.
Yeah, I think they've done well in making the Xbox cool. I think like gaming prior to that, well, prior to one generation before that, was never cool. You know, consoles were toys. They really were. And I think it was Sony that came along and said, you know what, we can make this cool. We can make this trendy. I mean, Sony were the first video game console manufacturer to put these things in clubs, you know, where adults were going out to party and then going into a little side room and playing video games. I think Microsoft, which is surprising, as I say, they're known for spreadsheets and databases and operating systems. I do think they've done a good job making this thing cool and trendy and appealing to people. And I think Jack used the word badass. You know, getting the rock in, as I've touched on before. You know, I think they really did manage to pull that off. They've done it well. Two things that were kind of revolutionary about the Xbox and things that we completely take for granted now. First video game console with a hard drive, and first video game console with a Ethernet connection in it, which was a drive, a push to use broadband with this thing rather than connecting a 56K modem to it. Tony, what do you reckon? How revolutionary were those changes?
That was incredible because I do actually recall setting up that Ethernet port everywhere we went. Whether you used that Ethernet port for LAN parties, whether you used it for, you know, just setting up to that god awful horrible broadband sound. I don't know if in Europe you had the same noise as we did, but you know, that old wind up, you know, horrible. And you know, I thought that was revolutionary because it kind of paved the way for online gaming and everything that became, right. Obviously, you still had that already happening on PC. But man, like having the opportunity to get onto Halo 2 or something like that and then launch Xbox Live and do that online, I think was just insane. You know, we obviously probably would still be there today. But to have it where it was at that time was just excellent.
Alex, what were your thoughts on hard drives and Ethernet connections?
Hard drive was actually really good because this was like the big thing for me. I was playing a lot of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater games back in the day, and you can load your CDs onto the hard drive and then play back the music from your hard drive. So we did this like all the time. Been playing for nights and nights on end, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, building parks, listening to music from the hard drive. Ethernet, on the other hand, was actually not a big deal in Germany because Xbox Live was available, but you needed to have a credit card, and credit cards in Germany are basically non-existent. So Xbox Live wasn't really a thing until 2006 in Germany.
Okay, I didn't realize
it was
that.
around. It was available, but I was like 18. Of course, I don't have a credit card at this age.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Also, one thing I want to touch on: DVD capabilities of the Xbox. Remember this one?
Yeah. So you could watch movies on this thing, providing you bought the remote. That was the paywall to watch DVDs on this thing.
Germany, they bundled it with a Robbie Williams DVD. I really hate the music of Robbie Williams.
It seems bizarre looking back that you would have to pay an extra. Well, you have to actually buy another part of hardware. Although it's kind of, I mean, obviously you didn't literally need a remote control to play DVDs. That was how they charge for it. But I think a lot of people don't realize, DVD technology is patented and it belongs to someone. So if you want to release a console that can play DVD movies, you have to pay the owner of those patents. And I think it was Sony. Is that right? Or at least
Sony.
Or at least
Yeah.
Sony was part of a group that owned DVD. I think it's the same for Blu-ray and that sort of thing nowadays.
The reasoning is actually entirely different. Of course, you have to pay the patent and everything to release the console. But if you don't have give the console the capabilities to actually play Blu-rays, you don't have to put the DVD banner on it, and you don't have to pay the patent. So they made the costs for the units make it come down a little bit, and then you buy the remote, and that pays the patent.
Gotcha. Yeah, so it's kind of a workaround in that regard.
Yeah.
Because I remember the GameCube. Well, a DVD wouldn't even have fitted in it because they had those little proprietary, cute little GameCube discs. I love those things. They were the cutest things.
Yeah.
But we knew from the get-go when the GameCube came out that this thing will never play movies. I think GameCube is arguably the last bastion of pure gaming machine. That's all it's done. It played video games. End of story. No movies, no music, nothing else. You're here to play Mario. Yeah, moving on a little bit then. Let's briefly talk about sales, and then we'll get stuck into talking about the actual games themselves that we played on these. Xbox sold 24 million consoles or thereabouts. To put that into perspective, the guys that were already on the scene, i.e. Sega sold 9 million Dreamcasts, and Nintendo sold 21 million GameCubes. So Xbox blew Sega out of the water, and they even beat GameCube. And Nintendo had been about for years and years. So in that regard, massive success. But they came way behind PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 sold, give me a second, I've just lost my numbers. Sorry, 155 million.
That's the people's elbow effect, ladies.
Which is about five. So for every Xbox sold, there was 5 PlayStations sold. Tony, we'll start with yourself. How well do you think Microsoft done in regards to entering the video game market with this console?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's a good step into it, right? You're the new kid on the block. You're coming in from the PC realm where, Microsoft, they may not necessarily develop them, but they did host things like Solitaire, Pinball. Who can forget that? And to come in and actually make a home console to compete with someone like Nintendo that had been around forever, Sega, PlayStation was obviously already a big deal at that time. Not a bad start. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? And I think a lot of us obviously remember it and still love Halo to this day. So, obviously that's a testament to, what the Xbox was capable of doing.
Yeah. And Jack, do you see that as a success, or do you think that Sony kind of held them back a little bit from the success they could have had?
I think, honestly, in my opinion, I think they had the best success that they could have, regardless of how well Sony did. I mean, in my honest, measurement for that, I mean, we saw the success of the Xbox itself, I think, carried more than any other of, Microsoft's other areas, like operating systems or, Excel and everything like that. And, I mean, it alone was able to promote, going on 3 new console generations now because of how well it did. And so I think it set the foundations for it, and those foundations and the continued success we saw after the original Xbox is a testament to see how well it started at the very beginning. So I actually don't think Sony hindered it at all, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, second place for Microsoft. What do you think?
I was surprised. I wouldn't have thought that, but ever since I got the Xbox, I was like, okay, the games are good. They have some really, really strong titles. So, and they appeal to adults, and were appealing to people who wanted to play cool games. So I think this is completely deserved. And as we have seen in the next console generation, they just completely took off from there.
Yeah. I think, and I think that's a lot when it comes to the console wars, and especially the sort of people that sit and argue and debate this stuff on Twitter. If you were the second best guitar player in the world, like that's not a failure. If you're the second fastest runner in the world, that's not a failure. But there seems to be this perception and this idea that if you're the second best video game console manufacturer on the planet, then you've lost, you know, and that's, to me, that's ridiculous. If you sell 24 million of anything, you have done incredibly well, you know. And then we've seen how it played out. We all know the story. The 360 came after the Xbox, and the success there was just completely unprecedented. So, yep, I think we're all in the same. We all agree that the Xbox was as big a success as it could have been, but not just a big success, but an important success for the future of Xbox. Okay, so we've talked enough about the console. Let's talk about the video games. You can't talk about Xbox without talking about Halo. And Alex, you're sitting there with the Master Chief.
What's this Halo you talk about? I've never heard of it.
I have to start with yourself. Halo, specifically the first one, known by many as Halo 1, but Halo Combat Evolved was the full title. Are you a fan?
Yeah, it's okay.
It's okay.
I played it once, maybe. So
7 out of 10.
Yeah. There's one like texture really, really weird, so unplayable. 1 out of 10. So no, seriously, it's one of my all-time favorite series. There are just like three gaming series which I would take like on a desert island, and Halo is definitely among them. I will always remember like playing the first Halo for the first time. I had the Xbox already. I got it in a bundle with, I think it was Jet Set Radio Future and Sega GT, like this racing game, and I liked those games. But then it was Christmas. I got Halo for Christmas. Popped it into the console. I was like, this looks so much better than everything I've seen before. Played through the first level, loved it, and then just the first couple of steps, setting on the ring, just looking around, and you were thinking like, this is incredible. I only seen this in, maybe, if you remember this game, Unreal, the first Unreal game.
Yes.
And having this on console, it was mind blowing to me.
I'll always remember that, because I don't think we've ever seen anything in terms of graphics. I don't think we've ever seen anything flow off into the distance the way we've seen that ring flow off. You know, the depth, the perception of depth that you kind of got within that game, to me personally anyway, was better than anything I'd seen before. And it really gave you that belief in that world that you'd just been dropped into. You really did believe you were on this insanely big ring. Tony, first Halo thoughts?
First, yeah, I mean, same as Alex. I'm taking Halo to the desert island with me, if it ever comes to that time, you know. I mean, if you go back and look at any launch title in history for any console, there is no other game out there that can hold up as well as Halo, in my opinion. It was just so revolutionary at the time. The graphics were insane. The controls, the story, the music, the sound. I mean, everything on there hit the mark at the time for just being, above where everybody else was at, it seemed like. I remember the first time I'd played it, I was actually at a friend's house. We were in his basement. We were way too young to be playing Halo. We couldn't have bought it on the street, I'm sure, but somehow we had it. And was playing it there all the time. We'd play it through on easy. We'd play it through on legendary. We'd play it through, 12 hours a day, like 3 days a week without showering before I'd finally get sent back to my parents' house, And, eventually I think my dad just gave in and was like, you know what, fuck it. We'll just buy him an Xbox. And, bless him for getting one from the flea market or wherever at the time. But yeah, Halo became a huge staple in our household. I know me and my brothers, we played the absolute holy shit out of it. Probably, I mean, again, the most played game in my household of all time between all four of us, as far as local co-op, everything that involved playing with friends and things like that. I'm always going to have the smashes and things like that of the world, but to me, Halo is definitely that game.
Mm-hmm. Jack?
I think Halo, I have like a love-hate relationship with it when I was a little child. I came from, like I said, Mario and Pokemon. So for me to play Halo, like I remember playing it for the first time and I thought everything was beautiful, but like the Covenant alone, like the elites and everything would scare me. And I was like convinced there was going to be like a Covenant invasion of Earth one day. I was also like 8. But then I finally got like brave enough to play the game, and I got to the part with the flood, and holy shit, I didn't pick up that game for like 6 months because that game scared me. Like that was the first game I was like, yo, I think this is like a hidden horror game or something like that. And everyone
turned
remembers
into
that.
Silent
like,
Hill.
Yeah, dude. And so like, oh man, that was I think like the multiplayer experiences though was awesome. Like LAN parties you were mentioning earlier, Anthony, like having 2 split screens in different rooms across the hallway. You got one group of kids playing it, another group of kids playing it, yelling back and forth, calling each other names. That was like prime gaming though. Like that was peak.
Absolutely.
And I think even compared to now with everything else, like there's no better time. There's no better time to have been a gamer than Halo 2, split screen, multiplayer is the best.
Yeah, I remember like back in the day, I just turned 18, had my first apartment, and all my friends coming over with their big CRT TVs over to my place, brought their Xboxes over.
Oh my god!
And we were playing like there for 3 days straight. Best memories, seriously.
Have you seen the photo? There's a photo that went viral, like probably back then, and it's guys having a LAN party, but they don't have room because the TVs are massive, the consoles are massive. They only.
Are you about to bring up that guy taped to the ceiling?
The guy's taped to the ceiling.
I know who this is.
Yeah,
this is actually in Germany.
Is it? Yeah.
What?
Yeah, I know who this is. Actually, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You actually know the guy? Like,
yeah.
That's
no
insane.
way.
That's insane.
But
That's a LAN party in Germany.
Yeah.
Back when we were like carrying our PCs around. I wasn't a dead LAN party, but it's actually in the area where I lived.
That's insane.
that's
insane.
awesome.
that is insane. What about you, Wayne? What'd you think of the Halo?
Honestly, I was initially not a fan of Halo. And I always had this strange theory about Halo. I always thought it was a fantastic introduction to first-person shooters for console gamers. I had played lots of PC first-person shooters, the original Half-Life, for example, and there was a bunch more, the names of which are evading, the likes of Doom and stuff like that. And I remember playing Halo and thinking, what's the big deal? I don't get it. I don't understand why this is blowing up. And later on, I started to think that it was because this was the people that were playing this game weren't people that came from PC. They were people that came from N64 or PlayStation 1 and hadn't played a lot of first-person games. And for them, I'm sure it was revolutionary. And it kind of blew them away. And then as I got into it more, I started to understand the importance of Master Chief as a character and as a mascot for Xbox, and then the lore behind all these games. I mean, it was very early in Halo's life that they started putting out novels and books and expanding upon the story. I've even had this. I don't think the story of Halo is even in the games. I think to totally understand this and appreciate it, you do need to delve beyond that, whether that be reading the novels or just subscribing to certain YouTube channels that delve into the lore and explain things and stuff like that. Halo is so deep. The lore is so deep, and you are genuinely just skimming the surface if you're just playing the games. Does anyone read any of the books or sort of delve into that lore?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
That's insane. Because there's lots.
There are tons of books. Seriously. There's I think it was the Forerunner trilogy. Then there's one book about Buck being turned into an ODST. There are lots of comics. There are TV shows which have been available on Xbox Live and now on Netflix also, which are not that good to be fair, but still it's lore.
Yeah, I mean, even if you didn't go into the deep lore, there was still the instruction manual at the time, which had everything you wanted to know about your Covenant enemy. There was still all the vehicles you could flip through and see in there. A little bit of background info on some of the different characters. There was all kinds of stuff in those instruction manuals back then. And Halo's, I remember, was really good. Even the box display art for Halo at the time was great. You had Master Chief standing there propped up, ready with his AR. Assault rifle, and then you had all that action going on in the background. Just looked absolutely incredible.
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, sure. Since you've been talking about the instruction manuals, and it was just so So really interesting to see the instruction manual for Halo 2 when it came out. I mean, everyone who plays this game has like a huge twist, and the whole instruction manual has been made. It's been written like from the perspective of the Covenant. And this has been really interesting, like giving more insight, giving them more depth, and more life. Good stuff.
It's a lost art, isn't it? The instruction manual, and it's a shame, especially whenever we used to buy games in brick and mortar stores, and there was that half an hour journey home. What are you going to do? Read the manual, and especially stuff like that where you started to get those little bits of lore. I've actually done something. I'll only briefly mention this because I don't want to be going off topic, but I bought the World of Cyberpunk 2077 book,
nice.
and I'm learning about the history and the collapse and the weapons and the manufacturers and stuff, and it's really, really cool getting all that knowledge before you go into the game. Sorry, let's get back on track. Okay, so Halo, obviously, massive when it comes to the history of Xbox. But what other original Xbox games are sort of like cherished memories for yourselves? Alex, anything in particular?
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned it before we started recording. Brute Force, like most of the people don't remember this game anymore. It was like a class-based third-person shooter, so it would actually be like a perfect fit to be remade for the modern console generation. It's basically, I think the studio was Digital Anvil, and they made a third-person shooter with the Halo engine. Actually, it was really good. It's really long too. Fond memories of this.
Yeah. Tony or Jack, did either of you play Brute Force?
I played the hell out of Brute Force. That was one of my go-tos back then, outside of Halos and a few other series. But yeah, Brute Force was excellent. I still remember. I think that dinosaur you played as was my favorite. The lizard. I don't even remember what it was called. But yeah, there were so many other games. I guess we could blow this open here because man, outside of Halo 1 and 2, obviously, which were huge, and we're probably going to dedicate a full episode or two to those at least here in the future. Other ones that stood out for me, Fable. On the OG Xbox, loved Fable, and I hope that series comes back. But man, that first one, I must have played through it 100 times. That good and evil moral system, even though it wasn't the most fleshed out thing in the entire world, still, I thought it was great at the time.
Leading up to Halo, did you follow the hype train for Fable? Sorry, I just said Halo, didn't I?
Yeah. It was. You were getting like interviews at the time, and mini previews, and like your Game Informers of the world, your Xbox magazines, which were actually a thing back then.
I actually think
they might still be now, but
for Fable, it was a game that suffered so badly from poor hype, overhyping. I don't know if you remember this. Peter Molyneux, the director of that game, used to go on and on about how dynamic this game would be, and literally everything in the game changes based upon your decisions. And it just wasn't the case. He just over-exaggerated every single point of the game, so that if you hadn't followed that and you just went into Fable and played the game, you'd be like, hey, this is great. But when you come off the back of Peter Molyneux's spiel, and then you play the game, you're sitting going, this isn't what I've been promised.
Keep that man away from the future of Fable, please.
I mean, he's gone. He's completely gone. He
Yeah.
doesn't make any video games anymore.
I think,
Thank God.
yeah, you could spend a lot of time talking about the constant mistakes of Peter Molyneux. But yeah,
what did you play, Jack? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go Jack. What did you play?
So the games I typically was playing on Xbox was I think Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic, classic, both 1 and 2. I loved Psychonauts, and I'll even go back and play that now, mainly like as an artist perspective. I mean, I think the lead designer's name was I think like Tim Robson, and he was like I think he's one of those game designers that had a background primarily as a character designer, and so it was kind of cool to see just like a character designer design a whole game from scratch, and with like developers and all that stuff as well. I thought that was cool though. He was the lead designer. And then Crimson Skies, mainly because like I love the whole idea of being a pilot at the time. And I think it was one of the most like aesthetically pleasing games, like with the skies, sunlights, like the ambiance of the view and everything like that. I mean, mechanically, it was just another flying game with shooting. It wasn't anything spectacular, but the visuals were outstanding. So I think those are like my top 3. and State of Emergency, but that one.
Hey. I didn't want to say it because I didn't know if it was too controversial. Like,
oh wait, can we go into it then? Like,
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, fill me in then. What's the controversy around?
All right, so I mean, there may not really be a controversy, but if this game came out in 2020, there would be an absolute shitstorm. Oh my god, this game basically the objective, if I can recall this right, and correct me if I'm wrong here. You were just, you played as either a gangster, you played as there was a few different characters on there if I can recall. I can't remember their exact roles and functions and classes and things like that, but your job was to basically go around and kill police, kill random civilians, and just terrorize the city. Like that was the only thing you did in that game.
So this was GTA jacked up to 11.
It was actually from Rockstar Games.
Oh really?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It is on the GTA 3 engine, and this game was completely banned in Germany.
So it was banned. Yeah, it already got the ban hammer.
Yeah.
I mean, that game was just absolutely insane for the amount of... again, if that game came out today, your objectives half the time were, again, to, like, kill this police officer, kill this chief, or, throw this Molotov cocktail into a window. It was like, it is kind of, looking back 20 years, like, that may not necessarily, have been fun or a good thing, but... just being young and dumb and not having any idea what the hell you're doing at the time, you would have thought it was the greatest thing on earth.
Yeah. Touching on, we mentioned the GTA games there and Rockstar. Vice City and San Andreas did come out on the Xbox. I think they're heavily associated with PlayStation. But as I say, they did come out on the Xbox. Did anyone play the GTA games on Xbox?
Of course, yeah.
Yep.
And was it similar to Max Payne? Were you getting that better experience than the PlayStation players?
Not really. It was basically the same game because you can really tell the game was tailored to the PlayStation hardware. It ran a little bit better, ran a little bit smoother. The resolution was a little bit higher. But apart from that, it's really 100% the same game.
Yeah,
same. I think at the time I was playing it more on PlayStation for the GTA series, but I do remember having, I think it was GTA 3 and because it came out later, and then there was San Andreas, obviously, that came out on Xbox too. But played a few of those crossovers on Xbox.
Yeah. I'm surprised no one's mentioned Elder Scrolls Morrowind. That was a huge game to be getting on a console game. If memory serves me right, that is actually bigger in terms of landmass. It's bigger than Skyrim.
Yeah.
I think so.
It's a huge game, and to get that on a console, looking back at the Xbox now, it seems it's a fairly simple box. That's quite an achievement, and also, that style of RPG game would have been very, very suited to PC players. So again, it's opening up the world of video games, bringing people into that RPG world that wouldn't necessarily have played those games previously.
Yeah, I think Morrowind, it came out originally on the Xbox, and I didn't play it until maybe a couple of years after that release on PC at the time. And that's where I played Morrowind, was PC. But yeah, to have that on a console was pretty mind-blowing at the time. It's a shame it might have even been overshadowed, some would say, by the Halos of the world and a lot of the other big series we knew. But yeah.
Do you think that there could have also been problems with the Morrowind launch on the Xbox because of like some of those maybe limitations and like the issues that it had? Because like, wasn't it pretty common for people to go through like multiple copies or buy like 5 or 6 copies of the game because it would just burn out the disc at some point? Like, it got so bad.
I remember doing that with a couple games. Yeah, the disc would just get demolished for whatever reason. I didn't know much about hardware at the time, but too many spins, and that was it for little Fido.
Yeah, another big game, and it's one I never played, and I regret not playing it, is Jade Empire. Anyone touch that?
Oh yeah. Like I never played it. I had a friend who had played it, and he basically said to me, "Oh yeah, it's not a Republic mixed with a fighting game."
I think there was also a lot of elements in that. It was an RPG by BioWare, and it predates their biggest franchise, Mass Effect. I think there was a lot of ideas in Jade Empire that kind of ended up in Mass Effect, so it kind of kind of set that franchise up to a certain degree.
I'd say other games too, Wayne. If I could jump in with these,
Sure,
I mean,
sure.
gosh, Fusion Frenzy for me, huge. I still got that. I got that installed on the new Xbox Series X out here because I don't think you can get higher peak, local multiplayer co-op or battle royale style, whatever the hell you want to call it, party games than that. That game was great, especially that little sumo game where you rolled around to those cages and knocked people off. That was great. Yeah, other ones, gosh, Burnout series for me. Prince of Persia, I know it came out on PlayStation as well, but I played that on Xbox.
Sands of Time, I absolutely loved Sands of Time. It's the only game that has crashed at me 90% through the game, and I just went back to the start and just played the whole thing again. Fantastic. The follow-up, the Warrior Within, I couldn't beat the first boss.
No.
And to this day, I never got to play anything beyond that. I really
20
should.
Years later.
I really should, especially since. Do you remember what the third one was? Sands of Time, Warrior Within.
I can't remember. The name
what's
of
this?
it,
This
no.
one game with the Godsmack soundtrack.
You got these chains in it, and there was like a good version and a bad version of the Prince.
That's right. I remember the cover art. I can't remember the name though.
And I wanted to get hands on with those chains, but I've talked about this before. I'm OCD about playing games in order. I can't play game number 3 if I didn't finish game number 2.
Yeah.
Wayne's Redemption. there were some other good games. Mech Assault stood out for me a lot. Mech Assault I thought was fabulous. Star
Steel
Wars
Battalion.
Battle. That's right. Yeah. There was Star Wars Battlefronts as well.
Those are good.
Ninja Gaiden. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's one of those two, but Ninja Gaiden as well.
Ninja Gaiden was brilliant, but it was tough.
Yeah.
It was really tough. I think that was my original sort of Dark Souls style game. Where you really need that patience. You need to go into that game knowing I'm going to die a lot. I'm going to die a lot here. But fantastic, absolutely fantastic game.
Yeah.
So, do you want to go ahead?
Games? Other games? Anybody?
Oh, PGR.
Splint? Oh, yes, PGR.
PGR Racing, which actually came off the back of, there was a game on the Dreamcast called Metropolis Street.
When you say PGR, sorry, is that Project Gotham Racing?
Project Gotham Racing, that's the one. And the thing I loved about that game, there was a system in it called Kudos system.
Yeah,
and I think it was similar to some of the systems in Burnout, where it kind of rewards you for driving dangerously. If you just skim past another car,
you get that near miss bonus
for that. If you get sliding around corners, big long slides, you get more points. And I think it was one of the first series to sort of implement something like that. That was great. Loved that. Brilliant.
Do you remember the loading screens of I think it was PGR 2 or PGR 3?
No.
You remember the game Geometry Wars?
Yes.
Oh yeah, that's right. You could play that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. Wow.
Like they made it into a standalone game for the Xbox 360 because it was so popular on the PGR series.
They weren't the first to do that either. I remember Ridge Racer on the PS1. You got to play Space Invaders while the game was loading.
Yeah.
It's weird looking back. Like the games took so long to load that they would actually give you a game to play while your game was loading.
Now in 2020, we don't even have loading times. Can't have anything good.
Well, in 2020, we don't even have the Xbox Series X or the PS5.
Per Alex.
Even though I have both pre-ordered.
Oh no!
What I'm surprised no one's mentioned Jet Set Radio, because it's a game that it comes up time and time again whenever I hear about that conversation of what games have drifted off into the past and really need to be resurrected. And Jet Set Radio seems to come up all the time when we talk about that. Sort of a wackier, more stylish Tony Hawk style game, except you're on rollerblades. Very, very cartoony style graphics. Never did play it, but as I say, you had it, yeah?
Yeah, I bought it with my Xbox. It was like a title that came bundled with it. So, but I actually really didn't like it because it was like a stubborn 18-year-old kid that was a skateboarder, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not going to touch a game that's like had some rollerblades in it.
Yeah,
fuck this.
There were some other games too that just came to mind. Actually, now that I think about it, Papa the Rappa, cannot forget.
Was that on Xbox? Oh,
No,
No,
it
that's
was.
PlayStation.
Oh, is it?
that's what I
think
always.
it
I was going to say.
Xbox.
No,
Was it?
That's PlayStation. That's a Sony IP.
Huh. I don't know why. I feel like I played that on Xbox. I don't know why.
Papa the Rappa.
Other ones, then I guess Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Talk about edgy. Oh, that's almost state of emergency level edge right there.
It
Yeah.
is.
Talk about the big poo enemy. The red boss that you have to throw some toilet paper.
I have that on 360. It came with what do you call it? There's like a rare collection of all
Rare
games.
replay.
That's the one. And I keep meaning to go and play it, but I think it's like, I just want to play it for a bit of fun, for a bit of a laugh, to see what it's like.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like 12 hours long, and I don't want to dedicate 12 hours just to something to check what it's like. And I mean, I've seen the songs, the silly songs on YouTube and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure back then, if I'd have played it, it would have been hilarious. I'm not sure how well it's dated, you know.
Yeah.
One other game I think is worth mentioning, Panzer Dragoon Orta.
Never played it.
It was like a cult classic. It was an on rails flying simulator, except you're on the back of a dragon. And I know that a lot of people love that. I think it was actually quite limited in the amount of copies that got pressed, and it ended up being a little bit rare and going for lots and lots of money. So if you dig through your collection of games and you find a Panzer Dragoon Orta, you might be in for a few quid. They tried to resurrect it on the launch of the Xbox One. They brought it back, and I think it was a flop. I don't think it was very good at all.
Yeah, I remember it sucked. I was just getting into it and was like, I'm not going to commit to this.
No, definitely not.
Speaking of resurrection, Stubbs the Zombie. I wish that game would come back because, I'm glad somebody else out there knows what that is, because that is a very hidden gem in the Xbox catalog, and to see that make a comeback, hopefully one day. I don't know. I think that that IP is owned by Disney now, so they're not going to put that game back out, because your job was to run around and eat the heads of people out there in the wild. But Disney's not going to bring that game back. No way. Stubbs the Zombie, man, forever on my list of regrets for just not playing it all the way through. Yeah.
I think that's about us. That'll wrap us up. Obviously, everyone's got great memories of this console. It's set up the 360, the One, the Series X, and we've now got a fantastic history of Xbox that all started with that one chunky console. So any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
Microsoft, I hope you get your shit together with the Xbox Series X. I love the Xbox. I want to keep playing Xbox.
I want to continue
and get Halo Infinite on shelves. Yeah. Tony, anything before we go?
No, that's it. I mean, you know where to find me. Game Savers channel. You know where to find us. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. We're all over the place. So hit us up. What about Alex, Jack? Anything?
Well, thanks for having me. It was really cool for me, and I hope I can come again sometime and talk about video games, because I
absolutely definitely
usually do this on my own to myself. It's kind of sad. But seriously, you had good fun. Thanks for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
Well, that was great. I really enjoyed that. It was good reminiscing over the old console. Thanks to Alex, thanks to Jack, thanks to Tony for coming on. I just want to thank, it's been 2 months since we've been running this podcast now. I just want to thank everyone that's, no matter how little you've contributed, whether it be a like on YouTube, a follow on the podcast app, a follow on Facebook. Everything helps, and we're really hoping to push this channel and this podcast and grow and get a good following behind us. But with that, I will wrap up and say thank you very much, and we will see you next week on episode 9 of Game Savers. Do not forget to save your game.